You are listening to another live podcast of Real Steel Sports on Spreaker Web Radio. Pardon me, I'm used to doing my school's opening address, but Spreaker Web Radio here, and James Krishnarik here live on Real Steel Sports on Spreaker Web Radio. Interesting NCAA tournament so far, and I am going to be breaking down the Sweet 16 matchups. And as followed, here's how they will be scheduled. On March 27th, which is this coming Thursday, Florida will be playing UCLA, and Dayton will be playing Stanford to decide in the regional semifinals for the Southern bracket. And in the West bracket, Arizona will take on San Diego State, and Baylor will take on Wisconsin. On the 28th, in the Eastern bracket, Virginia versus Michigan State in one of the marquee matchups of the tournament, and then Iowa State versus Connecticut, and then Kentucky versus Louisville, and pretty much one of the biggest marquee matchups we've had in a few years, and then Tennessee versus Michigan. Breaking each game down, it's going to be a lot of fun. But first, before I do, I think it'd be best, the sports world, I think, owes some of the most influential members of it a condolence and a wish well, because today, Ralph Wilson, the longtime owner of the Buffalo Bills, has passed away, and he's the last founding member of the AFL to still be alive. He was the last founding member, and I wish his family the best. My heart goes out to them right now. And Ralph Wilson was a great man. Passed away. He was age 95. And then Jim Kelly. It was announced yesterday his cancer is back with a vengeance, and he is in hospital right now in New York, I believe, awaiting surgery. I hope everything goes well with him, and I wish him nothing but the best. He's a Pittsburgh guy, and I love him to death. All right. Now, let's start off breaking down each game individually. And the first game we're going to start with is Florida versus UCLA. Florida, the top overall team in the country, and UCLA, fourth ranked, and currently, UCLA should be the fourth seed in the Southern tournament. Florida, in my opinion, should win this game because of their defense. This third in the nation, giving up just over 57 points a game. And on offense, they're efficient. They score 70.4 points per game. They don't score as efficiently as UCLA, but they score enough points to win a lot of games. Florida looked very impressive in the second half against Pitt and was pretty much impressive in his win over Albany. UCLA with the two wins over Tulsa and SF Austin. Again, that's not the same kind of competition as, say, Pitt, because Pitt was on a roll, and they played pretty well in the ACC tournament and pounded Colorado in the opening round, and Florida handled them with ease. And Pitt was a pretty good offensive team. I expect Florida to be able to handle UCLA and advance to the Elite Eight, take on the winner of Dayton and Stanford. Speaking of which, we have two teams in Dayton and Stanford that had no business really even being here. Stanford was barely able to make it in based on their incredibly average regular season for any tournament team. Stanford, for this season, 23-12 and 10-8 in the Pac-12. Pardon me, that was my phone. So if anything, they were lucky to even be in this position, yet they're making the most of it by first off getting an impressive win over New Mexico and then taking out Kansas. And they'll take on Dayton, who has been Cinderella story of the tournament so far, the 11th seed in the Southern bracket, taking out Ohio State by 1 and then taking out a Syracuse team that started off the season, I believe it was 24-25-0. Very impressive win for them. I think in this game, I would have to say right now that this is a very, very even matched game. Both these teams average just over 72 points per game. They both average just over 38 rebounds. Dayton averages a few more assists. But overall, this game looks pretty even when you stop and think about it, because you've got two teams, Cinderella teams, and when you get two teams like that playing against each other, you really can't predict what's going to happen. Dayton this year was 121st in offense and 91st in defense. Stanford was 116th in offense and 115th in defense. out of 351 schools. Those two teams were barely made it. I mean, Dayton was 5th in their own conference in the A10, and yet look at them now. They're sitting pretty in the Sweet 16 with the potential to go to the Elite 8. I say for this matchup, I say Dayton has a really good chance to win this because Deshaun Pierre and Jordan Sibbert have just been phenomenal this tournament. And the last time they reached the Sweet 16 was 1984, and ultimately they lost in the Elite 8 to Georgetown. I mean, what really set this team apart was their defense in this tournament. And that Ohio State and Syracuse are pretty good three-point teams, and they made 3 of 22 attempts on the first two games against Dayton. So shooting the three is not working against them. As for Stanford, this is the first time they've been in the tournament since 2008. And they have looked pretty good this tournament. Close wins nonetheless, but still good wins. I mean, Chasen Randall, 36 points this tournament. And they have been really good at holding teams down because neither Kansas nor New Mexico is able to establish any real offensive rhythm. I mean, Andrew Wiggins, who is one of the contenders for Player of the Year for Kansas, had 4 points against Stanford when he was averaging about 28 in the four games prior to that. So it just goes to show how they're shutting people down. I have to give Dayton a little bit of an edge because of the Cinderella thing, and because I think that they've played better teams. Kansas without Joel Embiid in the middle was more or less like a gaping hole. I mean, that they were going to get exposed eventually. It just took Stanford to do it. They played New Mexico, who's a pretty good team, but Dayton played Ohio State and Syracuse. Syracuse was a former #1 team at one point this year. They were undefeated to start the year, and I'm not saying it was a convincing win, but still, that's a huge win to knock off Syracuse. I have to say that Dayton has a slight edge here because they played Syracuse and they played Ohio State, two tougher teams. Even though Kansas, I think, is better than both of them, the fact that if you look at, they went 2 games against 2 really tough opponents and came out on top, I think Dayton has a slight edge. In the other matchups set for the 27th, Arizona versus San Diego State. This is going to be a very interesting game because this is the first matchup in the West bracket. San Diego barely beat New Mexico State in the first round and was very convincing beating North Dakota State in the second. And this is the second time they've been in the Sweet 16, first since 2011. And they've had a couple of pretty good performances this week, such as guard Xavier Thames, who's had 17.4 points per game, and he scored 30 of the 63 points against North Dakota State. And then you've got forward Dwayne Poley, who had 15 points off the bench in that game. So they're getting production from their whole roster. And then you got Arizona, top seed. They pretty much blew the doors off of Gonzaga in the second round after not looking as good against Weber in the first round. But Aaron Gordon's having 12.2 points per game and has had 34 points actually in the tournament. And Nick Johnson has had 35 points in the 2 games and has been 6 of 10 from 3 points. And Gonzaga was pretty impressive offensively against Oklahoma State. Committed, 21 turnovers against Arizona. So they're forcing turnovers too. I think Arizona wins this game by a small margin. They're scoring more per game. And if you look at if you break this matchup down even further, Arizona versus San Diego State. Arizona is 5th in the nation in defense, and San Diego State is 2nd. So it's really neck and neck with these two teams. But I think the tipping point is Arizona, and the fact that San Diego State has struggled in this tournament, and Arizona's defense is forcing a lot of turnovers. So if anything, that could be problematic for San Diego State. So I like Arizona through to the Elite 8. And I believe they'll take on the winner of Baylor and Wisconsin. Big 10 versus Big 12 here. Another fun game that should be fun to watch. Once you get to this point in the tournament, these are when the games like get good. Like early in the tournament, they're good, but this is when, in my opinion, you really find out what games are going to be good and what not. Now, this game should be interesting because you've got two teams. You know, Baylor, has been on fire this past part of the season. I mean, you look what they did to Creighton in the previous round, beating them by 30 points and beating Nebraska by 14 the first. I mean, forward Corey Jefferson, 13.5 points per game, and guard Brady Helsip, 11.8 points per game. They combined for 31 points against Creighton. And they shot 30 of 47, so their offense is on fire right now. As for Wisconsin, well, they've looked less than impressive this tournament. Yes, they beat American University in the first round by 40 points, but honestly, if you're one of the big dogs in the tournament, you got to beat those schools by a big margin. And Wisconsin in the second round, of course, taking on Oregon. Right now, Wisconsin, though, is playing against history because they've lost 3 straight games in the Sweet 16 and are trying to get back to the Final Four for the first time since 2000. Guard Travian Jackson has been a very good player for them this tournament. 35 points, 8 assists, and 12 rebounds for this tournament. And you've got the big guy in the center, Frank Kaminsky, 13.6 points per game. And against Oregon, 19 points and 5 rebounds. And all 5 starters for Wisconsin finished in double figures against Oregon. So they're getting production from their whole roster like Arizona is. I have to give a slight edge to Baylor in this matchup because how hot they've been lately. And in fact, they're scoring points like crazy. Because, again, they shot 30 of 47 from the field against Creighton, one of the better teams, one of the more underrated teams in the country. And the All-American Doug McDermott, they made him look like a fool in that game. So right now, they've been on fire. Wisconsin looked a little less than impressive. And if Baylor's beating teams like Creighton by 30 points, they've got a good shot to stay in this tournament long term. So I like Baylor to take out Wisconsin. And that would set up Arizona versus Baylor in the Elite Eight. And now for the bottom 2 brackets, 2 regionals of the bracket. Let's see. We've got Virginia versus Michigan State, Ohio State versus Connecticut in the East bracket, in the East regional, and the Midwest regional, you've got Kentucky and Louisville, and then Tennessee, Michigan. Virginia, Michigan State. Virginia has had a rocky start. Like against Coastal Carolina, they didn't look that great, but against Memphis, they looked pretty good. This is the first time they've been in the Sweet 16 since 1995, and this, in my opinion, is going to be one of the better games that we see all tournament long because you've got Michigan State, who was my pick in several of my brackets to win it, and many people's pick to win it, against Virginia, the team that took out Duke and Pitt to win the ACC tournament. Anthony Gill, 17 points against Coastal Carolina, and 13 and 8 rebounds against Memphis. And since the January 13th, the only loss Virginia has had is an overtime game to Maryland. So in regulation, they're 18-0. That just goes to show regulation, I guess. I'm not sure if they played other overtime games but that. But other than the January 13th loss, other than the loss to Maryland, January 13th since then they've been undefeated. As for Michigan State, Harvard gave them a good game in the second round. In the first round, though, they looked pretty impressive against Delaware. But Michigan State was slumping in the middle of the season, but now it seems like they've got most of their starters back. I mean, Tom Izzo, the coach for Michigan State, his teams are so consistent. 2000, they won the title. Sweet 16, this is their 3rd straight year. They were in the Final Four in 2009. Actually, I believe they were in the National Championship in 2009. Adrian Payne had 41